So we want to welcome everyone. We are so excited that you're here this evening. This is the third of a three-part series of input sessions, as you know, that we've been doing in order to gather input on the future of the Harvest Middle School site. Before we get started, I'd like to invite our translator to make the translation announcement.
Mr. Mesa, are you, can you make the announcement, please?
You can hear this message in the interpretation.
Okay, we can hear you now on the main channel.
There it is. Thank you. Sorry about that. Welcome. Sorry about that. We'll be interpreting this here meeting from Spanish to English and vice versa, or English to Spanish rather. And before we do, we wanted for everyone to select their language of preference on the lower part of their screen. You'll see in a moment.
Vamos a interpretar esta reunión del inglés a español y del español al inglés. Y antes de hacer eso, queremos que todo el mundo seleccione su idioma en la pantalla.
Yes, please. This moment, please select your language of preference here, the bottom lower right-hand side of your screen. Choose English or Spanish. And please, everyone needs to choose a language so we can interpret into your language. Please don't stay in original audio. Otherwise, you will not be able to hear the interpretation. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. So once again, welcome everyone to our third and final of our three-part series of community input sessions for the future of the Harvest Middle School site. Tonight, our session is going to focus on recommending the vision based on...
Recomendar la visión.
Do we have a problem there with the channel?
Yeah, it seems like they ended the interpretation option for some reason.
Yes.
1 second.
Enable it first. Thank you.
So did you want me, Dr. Massetti, to do the announcement in Spanish on how to access interpretation as well?
Why don't you do that? And we'll
I'll do that while they do they fix the channel.
Right. Thank you everyone for your patience.
Buenas noches. Esta noche la sesión tiene servicios de interpretación simultánea del español al inglés y del inglés al español. En breves momentos ustedes van a ver en la parte de abajo de su pantalla un icono de un globo terráqueo. Cuando lo vean van a poder hacer clic en ese icono y escoger el idioma Spanish o English. In a few moments, you're going to see in the bottom part of the Zoom screen an icon with a globe. You can click on that and choose either English or Spanish, as we will be providing simultaneous interpretation in both languages as needed. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. So again, for the third time, I'll just say welcome to the third of our three-part series of our Harvest Middle School site input sessions. Tonight we'll be focused on recommending the vision, and that's all based on the two initial engagements and conversation that we had with the community and the refining of the concepts and ideas that have been presented over the course of the last two meetings. We want to thank the community for their engagement. Community input has been critical into getting us to this point thus far, and will be critical as we continue to advance the concept and the ideas around the Harvest Middle School property. Just briefly, before we get started in content, for those of you that might be joining us for the first time, if you didn't make this session on February 8th nor on February 22nd, I just want to take a moment to introduce who's with me here tonight. So my name is Dr. Rossana Musetti. I am the Superintendent of Schools for the Napa Valley Unified School District. I'd like to say the proud Superintendent of Schools here. And I'm joined by one of my assistant superintendents tonight, Mr. Mike Pearson. Mr. Pearson, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yep. Hi, everyone. I'm Mike Pearson. I'm the Assistant Superintendent of Operational Services in the school district. Really happy to be on the Zoom and look forward to tonight's presentation. And I'm glad to see there's a good participation amount of people attending today's Zoom. So thank you.
Great. And we have our professional experts from Steinberg Hart who are also here with us tonight. Katia and Jackie, would you like to introduce yourselves as well?
Katia McLean, I'm the managing principal for Steinberg Hart. Jackie?
Yes, sorry about that. I'm Jackie Figueroa. I'm a designer at Steinberg Hart, and I'm here to assist you all today.
Great. So thank you. And with that, we will turn it over to Katia, who will be guiding us in this last round of input gathering that we'll do on the vision and concept that has been advanced through sessions 1 and 2. Go to work, Katia.
Thank you, Dr. Musadir. Good afternoon to everybody. Jackie, do you want to go to the next slide? We have completed the first part, the preliminary analysis from the site, and the second bubble was representing that initial engagement in that input session that we had with most of you, where we heard and asked you for keywords and what were those structures or elements that were important to the community to preserve. And the second meeting, or the third bubble that you see in the diagram of our community engagement plan, was when we refined the vision and we clarified some of the pending questions to making sure that we had understood you and heard you correctly. In this last meeting, and based on all the input that we have received, we are recommending a vision, including ideas and priorities that will serve as the framework for the solicitation of a developer to actually later on execute the vision and come up with a formal plan. Next. We always like to start with our guiding principles because they are actually the ones that have been informing us throughout the process. And I would like to remind everybody of these guiding principles. And they are in no particular order: to preserve the optimal number of assets for the community, for the use of the community at large. Also, to maximize the district assets in order to optimize, to generate the revenue to educate our students. And also our third guiding principles: to collaborate with the city of Napa on the vision for the guiding site, for the harvest site. Next. Today, we'll start with a recap of our first meetings. And just to remind you, the first engagement session, we had 46 participants. And in the second engagement session, we had 50 participants. Some of them have been repeated, but we had some new names. So it's a great participation to see over 96% of people attending these meetings. Next. And we talk about how the community input for these determining the vision is key. And we put a check mark because this is the third one of those sessions when we will receive community input. As I mentioned before, the district will sell the property, but before we even get there, all the input received is fitting into the request of proposals to the developers that we are starting to put together. We haven't started yet. And the collaboration with the city has been a constant. I will continue. And at the end, it's the city, the one that approves the entitlement and the building permit plans. Next. So as Dr. Musari mentioned, we appreciate all the feedback and questions and comments that were given. We actually went back to both recordings of the meetings and make sure that we had addressed all the questions and answered everything that you had asked us about. But to make sure, go to the next slide, we categorize all your questions into 4 key categories. And we may have answered some questions as part of another answer. So we want to make sure that we're clear and making sure that we have addressed all the concerns that the community has expressed. These 4 categories are public assets, ownership and access, housing, and next steps. In terms of public assets, again, remember that is based on the zoning around the site, the feedback from the city, and our own experience, that we are recommending that the highest and best use for the site moving forward is housing. One of the questions that was asked in the Spanish session was related to parking. How would we determine and make sure that there's enough parking? And I want to make sure that we all know that the city will be determining those number of parking spaces that are required for the community space. And then later the developer will work with the city to provide that required parking. Related to housing, we discussed the 10 to 15% of the units being affordable. And that percentage is what we believe is an acceptable alternative to on-site housing by the city. This is the equivalent to paying affordable housing fees. Why are we giving that range? Because again, it's the city the one that determines what that exact percentage will be, the equivalency. Also, the density will be determined by the city and depending on the general plan update. This is key because at this point, we're working in collaboration with them, but the general plan update process is happening right now. Ben mentioned that in our last meeting, and he also mentioned they are looking at putting a new designated zoning category to this site, and they may be doing that with other sites as well. This will determine the number of units allowed, and they most likely be a range of single family and multifamily. At the end, the developers will be the one in their proposals that will deliver the proposals that make financial sense and conforming with the general plan. Once the developer is selected, then they will work to the city to determine the exact amount of public open space requirements, infrastructure improvements to the roads and the utilities. The open space could also be used by different activities, and that is something that the city will work later on what is the programming for that open space and the community spaces. On the category of ownership and next steps, and we're going to combine those. The developer is the one that at the end finalizes the design of the project. These community input sessions define the vision, the ideas, the framework, but then we will develop and incorporate in the RFP for developers and to continue the work with the city. The site plan and the floor plans have not been finalized. We're still in that vision. We're still in that session of ideas. The plan is actually to sell the property to one developer, but that's the goal. It could be that somebody comes, with two developers combined, but ideally will be to one developer only. And the district will be selecting that developer. So, as I mentioned, I hope that we had answered all your questions, but what we will be doing is actually go one by one on those vision and priorities that we have established and making sure that if there are any specific questions to each one of them, that we answer at that time rather than waiting at the end. So I'll remind you, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen and make sure that if you have any comments, we address them as we go through these bullet points. So we heard from the community input that it's important, to meet the guiding principles. That's a must. That we just have as an overall framing session. But as the first bullet point for the vision of the site, we will maintain the playground fantastico. Any thoughts or comments about the playground fantastico and staying on the site? Questions? And I'll pause for a second as I ask for questions, and if there's nothing, then I will move to the second bullet point. All right, Jackie, can you go to the second? We also heard, there was a question. We would love to see the playground better integrated into the new project with a cohesive public space. I think that's a good goal, that doesn't feel that the playground fantastico is separated from the rest of the development. So not only maintaining, but integrating playground fantastico That's an excellent suggestion. Any other thoughts, questions? Excellent. Let's go to the second bullet point, Jackie. The second bullet point in this vision and priority is to maintain the pool, the swimming pool. It has been remodeled. It has a good long life ahead of it. So any questions, thoughts, comments? There's a question about, keeping Playground Fantastico. It's important, but also adding other activities or open space. For some pickleball courts, could be considered. I think that it's important, to mention that those requirements for open space will come from the city, as I mentioned before. And what's the program, and how they will be used can be determined later, with the city. There's a question about maintaining the pool for whom. Will this be part of Parks and Rec or will be open to the public? The idea is that it's not only for the development, that the pool will be open for everybody to use. But again, because this will be something that we need to confirm with the city and make sure that, that the program is according to what they see as well on their general plan.
I do just thank you so much, Katia. That is absolutely accurate, but I do want to speak just on behalf of district staff that we have a commitment to that, right? So our goal is to make the community assets as accessible and remain accessible to the public beyond just the development. So that's something Mr. Pearson, a longtime community member, assistant superintendent, playing a pivotal role in shaping this work. Our school board, our 7 representatives on the school board are very dedicated to this. So as we work through the, what this partnership with the city looks like, once it gets to the phase of the city and the developer working collaboratively, our goal is to set that as a constraint.
Thank you, Dr. Musetti. I think that also, and do you mind helping with a question about while the selling of the property is in progress, could the pool be available until the property is sold? So access to some of the facilities while the property is about to be to go on sale. Mike,
I'll answer that. So just so everybody knows, we do have to, the school is closing in June. We do need to get our staff off campus and take care of all the necessary needs on that. Once we've gotten through that and make sure our staff has been transitioned to their new site and things like that, then we're going to take inventory on what we're able to offer to the community for the community to be used. And we do have every intention to be able to still use some of the assets on the property to be used for the community until the property is sold.
Thank you, Mike. There's a question about, was there a consideration or consider an aquatic center on the site and not just a pool? And I would like to remind all of us of those guiding principles. At the end, we need to make sure that the property can be sold and that is financially feasible for then later on the district to use that money and educate our students and put it back into the district. So it is our recommendation that the pool stays, but that a lot of the site, could be used for housing. We believe that is the highest and best use.
Kat, did you see the comment regarding kind of the evolution of kind of more an aquatic center with differentiation of pools? There's a request around like a diving pool and a kiddie pool.
Typically those, yes, I now see the comment. Typically pools, and aquatic centers have several pools. And, as the comment mentioned, adding a pool for kids, a diving pool, and that requires a lot of space. So what we're trying to balance is the amount of space for community spaces at the same time of providing the highest and best use that we believe is housing. So not that those guiding principles are competing, but they definitely need to be in balance. I believe we answered. There's a question about the pool for whom, would it be open to the public? And yes, that is the goal, that those community spaces, the pool and playground Fantastico, stay open for the community and for community use, not just for the residents of only this developer, but open to all. And maybe related to the playground Fantastico and the pool, but a comment about it will be good to see the developer open, to the entire community, not with fences and separating the residents on the site. And that is the intent, that the development stays open and that there's access to the community to some of the spaces that will remain on site. All right, I'll go to the third question. And there's one pending question about housing, but I'm putting in the parking lot for a second. So the third bullet point is to have a football or soccer field. And this was very important, mentioned several times in our English session and in our Spanish session, of how much the community uses the soccer field. So I had mentioned before that is key to understand that there's a lifespan that the track and the field has at that point. So we actually believe that it would be better to have a new soccer field located in that on the site. Any thoughts or questions? And similar to the comment that I mentioned before, this will be available for community use. The community at large can use so many of these assets, and it's important to provide for many more who don't live in the site. Correct. This is not only for the residents of the site, the playground Fantastico, the pool, the soccer field. This would be for the community at large.
And I think the comment illuminates like how that, again, that access to the community at large, that seems to be coming up as really, really important. And we are aligned with that. So like I said before, and I love how this attendee has reminded us that it's not just residents that live in the locality there of South Napa, but even beyond, in terms of what the site has to offer the community at large. So again, that commitment to community access.
There's a question about the field, and we're not reinventing the wheel, and we are not hoping that it goes to waste. To the contrary. But Mike, do you want to expand a little bit in terms of the field, the useful life, that a synthetic field has, and the preliminary recommendations that you already know, exist for the field?
Yes, correct. Thank you, Katya. So that field is getting near the end of its usefulness as far from the standpoint of a synthetic turf. It would have to be replaced in the very near future. And I think, so as far as money going to waste, I mean, we have used that money on that particular field, I think, in a good way. And like I just said, the the field is getting near its usefulness and would have to be replaced in the near future if it was continued as a synthetic turf.
Thank you, Mike. Jackie, do you mind going to the fourth bullet point? The fourth bullet point in this vision is to create a community space, create a community center. And we had discussed before how also the older gym, probably would need some renovation if it's to stay. However, the newer gym has a good, useful life still remaining, and it's in a good location on the site in order to stay and become that community space, community center. It has restrooms, it has a classroom attached to it that we believe very beneficial to the community and can serve as one of these community spaces, community centers that the community has expressed a desire to have. Any thoughts, questions?
Do you see the comment there regarding pickleball?
Yes, and I was gonna talk about that, and reinforce the point that I made about there may be a need for additional open space and other facilities as part of the site. So that typically comes from conversations and requirements from the city on what that open space requirement is. And the program then could be for pickleball or tennis courts, or whatever the city decides and recommends, that could be the program for that open space. So we're not defining program just yet, but that would be something that will be done later on with the city and with input with the city, and most likely once the developers put their proposal to see what the space requirements are for open space, that could be converted again to pickleball or tennis courts or just simply an open space. There's a question about management, and we had this question before. Who will manage the community space and the community center? And it can be stipulated that the community has always access to those services for the residents, not just the development, but for the community at large. And yes, we had responded to this, but we'll reinforce that as part of the vision is that these community spaces, community centers, become available to the community at large.
And like a mechanism for that is including that sort of in the deed of the property, I think is what we had mentioned. So there's
Correct.
ways to deed the property in the sale where that will remain a constraint, in beyond, current people, right? So the property can be deeded in that way. And then going back to the management of the community space and community center, just to reiterate, the school district in the selling of the property will not be involved in management of any of the community space. That is something that will be worked out with the city and the developer.
Thank you, Dr. Musetti.
Mm-hmm.
There's a comment about how cities, not just the city of Napa, but a lot of cities are understaffed, and how are they going to be able to add staff to the Parks and Recs department? I don't see Vin in the call, but that is something for the city, to work out of how will they maintain that. As Dr. Musetti mentioned, it will be worked out with the developer, with the city, of who is in charge of maintenance.
Yes, and I do want to say, Mr. Vin Smith, we've been working so collaboratively and closely with. He's just been an extraordinary partner as the representative of the city, who's been working with us as we unfold as the concept sort of unfolds. He was not able to make it tonight due to something else that came up at the city, But we'll be sure to communicate and take all this feedback to inform our next round of discussions with the city, with him as the city representative that we're working with.
There's also a comment about the need for a community kitchen. And we didn't see that in the original priorities of items to remain. So I would like to consider that as an item that we put in the parking lot. And if the developer can come with a proposal that has, a kitchen, that would be great. But that may be something that we don't incorporate, at the beginning, in order to allow for more area for housing on the site. And again, maximizing the assets of the school, balancing that with the revenue that we would want to get out of the property. There's also a question about the name of the project. This would also come out, as another bullet point. So I'm going to hold on to answering that question for a moment. Any other thoughts about the community space or the community center? All right, Jackie, do you mind moving to the next one? This is something that came up, in one of our preliminary conversations, and to deliver a pedestrian and bike-friendly access to the community at large to these areas for a variety of programs. And we believe that this bullet point actually starts echoing some of the questions and the comments that we've been having this afternoon. The community space open to the community at large, offering a variety of programs, but also be pedestrian and bike-friendly access to the community. There's a comment about equitable access to those facilities and programming, particularly for those who live in the Harvest neighborhood. And I completely agree. I like, that statement of assuring that equitable access to all facilities to all in the community.
Yeah, and we continue to see that again. I'll just reiterate that continues to emerge as a theme. And I know that that's also equally important to our school board as they will be the governing body that approves the resolutions around the surplusing of the property and the sale of the property. I know that this is absolutely critical for them.
All right. Before we jump into the next bullet point that it's related to housing, there's a question that has come up before, and I believe we answered it early in the presentation, but I want to emphasize, the answer. After the school closes, is it the plan to fence off the entire campus and no longer be accessible? So, Mike, do you mind answering that question again?
So yeah, I think we're going to be doing an assessment on that. We do not plan to fence off the areas to any of the fields or both the grass and synthetic. We still plan to have access to the gymnasiums and to the pool, since those are used by various outside users in the community. It does remain to be seen about the use of any of the buildings themselves. And so those may have to require some fencing just to protect the assets. And no longer be responsible for the property. And we will be responsible for the property up until it is sold. So we will have to provide upkeep on the property until that point.
Thank you, Mike. There's also a question about coordinating transit and provide a safe bus stop, in all areas. As I mentioned, the city will put some requirements for infrastructure of roads, access to public transportation, as part of the development. So that will come from the city on the typical requirements that they always have for these type of developments.
And Katya, I do want to mention, I mean, it's not necessarily pertinent to the community necessarily, but we do plan to use Harvest as a hub for students that we're going to be busing to other middle schools in the Valley. So just so people know that we do have the plan for our school district to still use Harvest Middle School as the hub to bus kids to Redwood, Silverado, or Unidos Middle School.
And another comment about another program that could be incorporated, maybe a community garden, with a master gardener program. As I mentioned, that the intent is in this 5th bullet point to leave it open to have a variety of programs that could be included on the site. And that coordination of final programming of the open spaces will be done with the city. Thank you, Jackie, for moving it to the other side. All right, I'll go to the next bullet point. And the next bullet point is related to affordable housing. The goal will be to provide on-site affordable housing units aligned with the Napa Municipal Code. This is, of course, subject to approval by the City of Napa as an alternative equivalent to paying affordable housing fees. We had a conversation before about affordable housing. It's not uncommon that a city requests a developer to pay fees for affordable housing. However, the commitment from the district towards the community to provide on-site affordable housing and maintain this link to the community, it's key. So that's why we had clarified that the goal will be to provide on-site affordable housing, but it's subject to approval to the city. The city still needs to say okay to this. If you remember, in addition, in our previous meetings, I had discussed that probably that's around 10 to 15% of all the units will be affordable. And again, the final determination of the number of units will be made in collaboration with the city and the developer, and assuming that, again, that the requirement for the cities that have this equivalency to paying affordable housing fees. That's what we're leaving the range, because that is a negotiation that needs to happen with the city and once the developer is selected. So there was a question about how the income range will be determined for this affordable housing. This is also dependent on what the city determines in the general plan. So it will be established in collaboration with the city and with the district.
Do you see the question around the sale?
Ooh, I haven't been paying attention. I'll go back to questions.
I'm trying to figure out if there's a question around what entity or who will determine how much funding from the sale. Would you like to address that here in this category?
I don't know if I see that question, Dr. Musseri. Do you mind reading?
Okay, I'll read it. What entity or who will determine how much funding from the sale will be allocated to the NVUSD? And I appreciate in parentheses, it says, yes, greatly needed. Yes, greatly needed. For educational purpose, and how much to improving and adding to the community assets. How will this be done? So I do want to, this is a kind of there's sort of 3 things I'd like to address, and Mike, if I forget something, maybe you can help me out. So the first piece is just FYI, the sale of the property, the requirement is when we sell the property, the funds that we make from this property are to go back into our facilities. So they're intended to go back into making other capital improvements in the district. So you might say, well, then how does that help the educational purpose? Because I know early on in the first meeting, I spoke a lot about our mission is to educate, not in managing properties, nor to solve sort of the housing issue in the Valley, right? Our primary mission is to educate. But how this helps, this revenue helps in our educational mission is that we have, part of what we do is we have to maintain all of the facilities in which our students attend school. And so by having these revenues to address the many, many, many facilities issues that we have across all of our campuses, it alleviates pressure from our general fund and doesn't require us to, overly rely on our reserve for facility emergencies and improvements, which then allows us to use our general fund dollars towards educational program. So that's kind of the connection on how the revenue, despite the fact that the revenue will go directly back into improving other facilities, helps us be able to deliver on our mission of education, because then we can use our general fund for program services and the educational focus for our students. Then the question around improving and adding to the community assets. So, that too becomes really, I think, and Katya, maybe you can help me out, Mike, you can help me out, more a focus of a negotiation again between, as the city and the developer start to engage, we'll have sort of whatever our non-negotiable number is in terms of revenue that we expect for the property, given all the constraints that we lay out. And then, the developer will need things from the city. And so part of the discussions that they can have is how much of the project then will be dedicated to that developer improving these community assets. Did I say that more or less correctly, Katya?
That is correct. And it's always a negotiation that happens in any development with any city. The city comes with a set of requirements. You must, I'm going to put some examples. You must improve this road. You must improve this access. You must provide this amount of open space or pay X amount of fees. And that it's a negotiation that happens with the city, with their requirements and what the developer would like to propose. So yes, Dr. Musetti, you are correct that that's something that comes then later with the requirements of the city in accordance with the general plan and what the developer can do as part in order to make this project financially feasible. Thank you for that question. That had several parts, so hope that we addressed the question. There's another note about parking. And as I mentioned, the city will be the one that will determine the amount of parking that will be required for the community spaces, for the maintaining the parking that is around Playground Fantastico, and then the developer comes with a proposal of parking for housing. A question for Dr. Musetti or for Mike. Who can we contact when an issue arises at the property prior to the development of the property? So while steering this transition.
Luckily, that's me. So,
There's the winner.
I'm the winner, winner chicken dinner on that one. So yeah, if you have questions or concerns about the property, you can email. I think my email address is on the district's website. There's also, if you look for facilities on the district website, there's also an email address for that as well too. We try to be as responsive as we can in a timely manner.
And then I want to just elaborate on that. So Mike, up until the point, right, of us, releasing the property and it going into development. But from what I understand, and Katya, given your expertise in the field around developments and in communities, there will be a whole other wave of input, right? And I think we've said that a handful of times across these 3 sessions. There'll be a next round and wave of input when the city and the developer, launch the potential project.
That is correct. There would be actually 2 additional possible points of engagement. One is directly on the general plan update. And I'll mention at the end of the meeting and remind everybody, but as the city assigns a new zoning use for this property, they're seeking input on their general plan update. So that is one area where you could have immediate participation on what that rezoning will be for this site. And then second, as part of any developer, there's always a community meeting. So that would be another point, for the community to check and provide input based on what the developer is already proposing, and you will have a more tangible plan, to make any comments. So yes, Dr. Musetti, you're correct.
Yeah, Katya, and I just want to build on that. I want to say it was either 2 or 3 weeks ago, so everybody knows that the city did release their draft general plan on the city's website. So I really would encourage people to review the draft general plan. It's a very comprehensive document, very long document, but it is comprehensive. And as Katya mentioned, there's a prime opportunity for folks in the community to weigh in on that general plan as it sees right now.
There's a comment about the RFP that I will answer, in a couple of bullet points, coming up. So hold on there. Jackie, do you mind going to the next bullet point? Something that we also heard from the community is that it would be great to honor the history of the site, either with a name or with a plaque. And there are a couple of comments related to this. When it comes time to name the project, it would be great that there's some incorporation of the regional school, Ridgeview, and maybe put in some of the regional marble sign on the facade, that is in the facade from the school, in some type of signage or monument. And that is the intent of these bullet points that we have heard from the community, really to honor the history of the site. So thank you for those 2 comments, and notes. And I would like to open it again to, to questions or comments related to honoring, the history of the site. All right. Okay, so then I'll move on to the next bullet point. And this is the last one from all the feedback that we've been receiving, to ensure that there's a robust RFP process for the developer selection, meeting all the guiding principles and the community vision, ensuring that all the input that we have received, it's incorporated, and making sure that this doesn't just go to one developer, that it actually goes to a variety of developers that can provide, different options for the site. So there's a note, to please include the Housing Land Trust of Sonoma regarding the information of the sale of the Harvest Middle School, and the consideration that the RFP, need to take into account of offering affordable housing, and if it's possible to surpass, that affordable housing. So we will make sure that Housing Land Trust of Sonoma, it's included in the conversation as we continue the conversations with the city and the collaboration with the city. And there have been a lot of comments before of how do we make sure that all of this at the end will be included. So that's why we want to make sure that the process is robust and that we continue to put those guiding principles at the forefront, and these bullet points that are what we believe is the synthesis of the community vision incorporated in the responses from the developers. Will the RFP be available for public review? Dr. Musetti and Mike, remind me how the district has done these before and what has been the process that the district has followed before with the RFP.
The RFP will be completely for public view. Our assistant superintendent, Rob Manguala, will be in charge of establishing the RFB, and he is at another district meeting this evening. But what I can say is that it will be accessible, all the information will be accessible via our website at nbusd.org. Mike, do you have anything you want to add?
I think the only thing I would add is I think prior to the RFP process, we'll have a 7-Eleven process going through, just to bring that up. So I mean, I don't know if we want to go into detail on the 7-Eleven process, but the RFP process will be after, or will come after we've done our 7-Eleven diligence on the property.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Dr. Musetti. So these are all the bullet points that we believe capture all the comments received, the priorities that we have established when we voted on what elements to maintain: Playground Fantastico, the pool, having a soccer field, having a community center. Those were the big words that we asked you at the beginning. And again, that access to the community at large, not just the residents, the possibility of a variety of programs, the concept of providing on-site affordable housing, honoring the history of the site, and at the end, making sure that the RFP process is robust and that meets those principles and the community vision. Jackie, do you want to go to the site plan? We had shown that, you know, the preliminary concept plan at the end of our last meeting, but we wanted to bring it back again. This is what we're thinking, that it will be a good zoning diagram, you know, or concept diagram. We call this bubbles diagram, you know, where things could be located on site. Keeping Playground Fantastico, keeping that pool, and because of its location, that the new gym actually plays really, really well in connection with the pool. Having some type of green space that could be used for pickleball, tennis. At this point, we're just saying, you know, that is an open space. We actually call it green, and we could relabel that open space. And then the rest areas designated for housing, the north part of the site and the south part of the site. Any thoughts or comments? Right, Jackie, do you want to go to the last image that has the next steps? Mike mentioned, you know, these before. It is important to know that that the concept plan will be taken, you know, to the 7-Eleven committee. However, before that, we will develop a concept plan with the city input regarding density, unit mix, and community spaces. And the reason why we're not doing that right now is because we needed that general plan update to guide us the process, and the city is currently seeking engagement for that Napa 2040 general plan. So most likely, and what we are anticipating is that late fall, early winter, we would have, you know, all the community input for that general plan update that the city is doing. And then by January of 2023, you know, we could probably take that concept plan to the 7-Eleven committee. The bottom right, I have added, you know, the website where the Napa 2040 is. And if you see, there's a link, you know, in the presentation that we will be posting on the district's website, but also an opportunity if you go to that website to the second tab at the top to participate and provide input. And thank you for the correction. The sport is called pickleball. Apologies if I mispronounce it. So we will make sure to incorporate and make sure that that the variety of programs are incorporated. And Mike, do you want to talk a little bit more of what is the 7-Eleven committee and how does that work?
Yeah, so before the school district can actually sell the property, we actually have to convene a 7-Eleven committee and have a recommendation from the committee to sell the property. That is, if they give that recommendation. And then that recommendation is carried forth to the Board of Education, who then approves or does not approve the recommendation from the 7-Eleven committee. And the 7-Eleven committee is spelled out in education code, and it is made up of a minimum of 7 community members and up to 11 community members. And I believe we have 11 community members on that committee. We most recently used the committee to help guide us in what we should do with the Carneros property, which is or some of you may know more familiar with, was where Stonebridge School was located, but it's out on Los Carneros Avenue. And so what they said, as I said earlier, and I'm being very loosely with my definition of this, but what they do is they tell us what we should do with the disposal of a particular property. And so that's essentially what their guidance would be to review with this help of staff, the usefulness of what would be the best use of this particular property. So we plan to bring to them the recommendations that we've been discussing here, to the 7-Eleven committee, who then will, again, like I said, either move forward a recommendation to the Board of Education or not. And then, as I said earlier, they're made up of community members. We currently have a committee that has been convened. If we needed more members, then we would be reaching out to the community to ask for more membership as needed. And Dr. Musetti, if I left anything out, please.
No, you did a great job, Mr. Pearson. The 7-Eleven committee is something that is nested within the education code. It's the legal code that guides the operations and business of school districts. The education code lays out that when a district is going to surplus a property to go then towards sale of the property, if that property was previously a school, it must go through the surplus property. And that description that Mike gave about the 7-Eleven committee is described in Ed Code, right? So it's it's an advisory committee, representative of community members to vet a recommendation that that committee works with staff. They vet and vote on a recommendation, and then that recommendation is taken to the board. And then the board can vote on that advisory recommendation. So that's just a process that we have to follow as dictated in the education code.
Thank you both. Any additional questions, comments, thoughts? And because this has been asked before, this afternoon we've had 30 participants, not including the district staff or us as the presenters.
I want to just say hi to Lori Piombo and thank her for the really nice comment. So thank you so much. I'm so glad that you feel encouraged. I know how vested so many of you, like Ms. Piombo, so many of you who are here and present tonight are very vested in the community that surrounds Harvest. And we know that the school closure process was very, very challenging and complicated. It's a very difficult decision. But our goal is to advance the concept as we're describing here, and we're glad that it's resonating with some of you. So I think with that, we're good. We will repeat the session shortly with our Spanish-speaking community. I think I just want to let everybody know that in terms of sort of the next step to watch, is really, I think what Mike said, the next public process for us will be that 7-Eleven committee process. And we will do a thorough job of advertising that process, so you can then watch the 7-Eleven committee prepare their recommendation for the surplus, so that then can position us to work with the city, the developer, establish the RFP, etc. All right.
And Dr. Mercedes, just to mention that on that, there may be a period of silence, everybody, that you're not hearing anything, and please don't worry about that. But if you should be wondering what's happening and maybe you haven't heard anything, feel free to email us or email me particularly, and I'll get back to you pretty quickly to let you know what the next steps are with the 7-Eleven committee. But there will be a period of silence for a while before we reconvene the 7-Eleven committee.
And thank you to the entire community for attending, these meetings, for participating, for continue to ask questions and be participants, in this process. We asked at the beginning that the last meeting would be a celebration, and we hope that that's what this is. As we continue with the process, and thank you for the district also for allowing us the opportunity to collaborate in this process with you.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
If you want to see it all in Espanol, we'll be back on shortly. Okay. Bye-bye. Thank you.